Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Double, and today, huge shout out to Matt over in the Sonicake PocketMaster Facebook group. He's come up with a killer set of files, single and dual space PocketMaster holders that you can add these switches to. And I mean, the switches are only like $8 for a couple of them, maybe $7, but so easy now to get to the looper and the tuner and to do all the stopping and starting. If you have canoes on your feet like me, this is a killer mod for the PocketMaster. I'm going to walk you through how to do it. It's really not expensive. I'm going to leave a link to the file that Matt created. It'll be in the description box below. So if you have a 3D printer, you can print yourself out one. I'll also leave a link to the PocketMaster Facebook group because this little guy it's just great. I love it. All right, I'm just going to shut up about all of it and walk you through how to get these switches wired up and into this 3D printed mold. The switches that I have, they were like $7.99 off of Amazon. And there's an extra nut in there that allows you to adjust the height of the switch so that it's flush, not as low as the base of this unit. He has really thought this through. It's probably the second or third version of his file that I'm holding here, and I think he's even updated it even more. There's a couple of ways to do this. As far as the approach, you're obviously going to have to take apart the PocketMaster, so you're going to need a little itty-bitty Phillips head guy, and I took off the little rubber feet. So take off the screws on each side of the plate here, and they were down pretty tight. That little reset switch, that's the only thing I would say maybe add to the file there, Matt, is access hole to that reset switch, because I have had this thing freeze up on me and I've had to use that switch. So you take the base plate off once you get everything done there, and here's what this little guy looks like. Can you believe this can make all the amazing sounds that it does? And what we're going to do is flip it over. We're going to be applying some solder and some leads to 4 points on this board. And you can actually see them on the base of the board here, but I don't feel confident enough with my soldering skills to get around all of that componentry right there. And I think Matt's idea of taking this whole unit apart and just applying this to the other side is much better. So I think there's 5 other screws that you're then going to loosen in order to release the circuit board from the housing. Make sure you keep track of all your screws. I believe these were all the same. There were a couple of different ones. All of the housing holding ones are the same. I think the extra different ones were just from the belt clip. So we're gonna use a couple of different leads. I have 2 colors of leads just to help me understand which is which, and I think I actually put the green not on the ground. There's all sorts of different wiring configurations. You just use 2 colors because it'll help when you actually have to get this done up. Another thing that really helps is to use solder flux. Now I like the flux paste, and in some situations the liquid is just as good, but this really helps your solder disperse properly across your components and the wiring. So you're going to put a little bit on each one of these, the ends of the leads. I've wrapped the leads around the lugs, and then I've gone ahead and, kind of tightened them up a little bit and made them snug. I always recommend getting a little solder on the tip before you even start soldering, because that just helps start the soldering process. It helps get the gun to the right temperature. And then just quickly apply the solder while you're touching the iron to the actual metal piece. And I kind of use the wiring in between it, so it's making a wire sandwich between the component and the soldering iron. And I even use a little bit of the flux to clean everything off. So now I have 2 different color wires on one switch, and I don't do the best job of soldering, but hey, it's done. You want to make sure you leave yourself some length, because something I'll point out, I did it a little bit backwards, I think, now that I've watched myself do this a couple of times. It makes it easier if you have a little extra cable to work with, because you can always cut that, and it's really a pain to add more. So I'm just going to continue soldering all of these points onto the switches. I'm going to continue soldering all of the wiring onto the switches, and once I'm done doing that step, then I apply some of the flux also to the bare wire side of the cable. I've already stripped back some of the housing, that housing that's on there, and then I what they call tinned these cables, and that's way too much cable at the end. But like I said, we can trim this off. It actually, you're going to end up wanting to trim that off if you leave that much. They could be much shorter leads, but like I said, I like to have just a little bit extra to work with, because once you get these in and mounted, and this is the backward step. I think I probably could have soldered the leads to the board first, and then just left the extra wire through, done the switches, and wired the switches in once I mounted the board back into its housing, and then mounted the housing onto this case. But either way, one way or another, leave yourself extra cable. And what you're going to do is, there are 2 switches in here, and each one has 4 contact points. We're going to hit the bottom left of each one, and then we're also going to hit the top right with each one. And the orientation of the cables will matter. That will make a difference. So you want to make sure that you use, like I said, 2 different colored cables. So let's get the housing off of the circuit board. You remove the knob, and then very carefully lay it down. In fact, I think I propped something up behind it. There's a yellow, you can see this yellow plastic piece that's holding in the screen, and I just showed you the little rubber foot switchy guys. They just kind of pull right out, and that screen is being held down by that yellow piece of plastic, and then connected to the board by a very flimsy lead. So you have to be very careful. You can't take it too far apart. You can't take them too far away from each other. You have to be very careful when you're moving around with these. So what I did was, I wired up the switches and then wired up the board. I probably really could have done it the other way. There are 4 little screws, very small screws, that are holding that yellow piece of plastic in. And then there's 2 little retaining pins on the back of the screen that actually fit into little holes on the yellow piece of plastic. So the orientation has to be very particular when you put it back together. So make sure you take a notice of that, keep everything together, and then at this stage, be very, very careful. So as you can see, I have the green cable on the right side, my right side of the switch, as it's facing up, and the wiring is hitting or heading towards the circuit board. I'm going to cut off these ends because it's just far too much, but I do have everything still tinned. So I have a little bit of solder on the end of those lines right there. Those leads have just a little solder, and then you just kind of got to be careful here when you're doing this. So my green cable is not going to go to the right side of the switch. It's actually going to go over to the left side. And then the same thing with the brown cable. The brown cable's coming out of the left side of the switch, but I'm going to want it to go over to the right side of this switch. And we go to the bottom left with the green, and then top right with the brown, or whatever orientation you have. Your installed switch side right will go to the PocketMaster switch side lower left, and the one that's on the left will go over to the PocketMaster right side. And just be careful doing this. I don't have the hottest gun, so I had to really make sure that I worked quickly, and I used that flux. I also had to really be careful of not touching any of the wires, and you just kind of have to be patient in getting the wiring to stay in place. I did figure out a couple of tricks with this thin wire that I have, and it just helps to use something that thin as opposed to a thicker gauge wire that you really can't work with, because I had one of these cables separate as I was putting it back together. I'll show you all that at the end. I had to redo it as I was testing it. But once everything is in place and cooled and looking good, and nothing is really touching anything that it shouldn't be, and everything is touching what it should be, you can now hold the switch down that turns on the unit, and you're going to want to just test and make sure. As you can see right here, I thought I was having a problem, and I did not know what was going on. So I kind of gave it the once over and gave it a check, and it turns out everything was fine. I just hadn't held the switch down long enough, of course. So yeah, you're gonna want to make sure you check your work. And then once the unit does boot, just test the switches. I'm using just the same orientation as what's there. The one on the left is going to go down, the one on the right is going to go up. Hit them both together and you get the tuner. And if you hold them, of course, you get the looper. So now that we're good there, we're going to reassemble the PocketMaster itself. We're going to put the circuit board and the housing back together, and we are going to do that again very carefully. Because now I got myself into a hole here, I have very little room to work with. You can see I had to use a little ramekin, a restaurant ramekin, to prop the circuit board up a touch in order to not put too much stress on the cable between the monitor, the little video monitor there, and the circuit board. And then carefully get your screws put in place. Make sure the 2 pinholes are lined up with the pins on the back of the screen, and get all 4 of these. I had them down kind of loose until I made sure that everything was in place and in the proper settings, spaces in the mold. There's little plastic outlines, there's rims, all that kind of stuff. You want to just kind of make sure it's all in place properly, and then give the final tighten down, and then you can put the case back onto the shell. And you can see here, doing all of that, I messed up one of the solders, so I grabbed the gun and I just had to do it all again, but with everything in the way. So yeah, if that happens, it happens. You know, it's just going to be the way it is. But reapply the flux, get a little solder on the tip, and then apply the solder to the point and the lead at the same time, while kind of focusing the heat a little bit more on the point on the circuit board switch, and then lay the line into that. If you haven't really done this kind of soldering work, maybe this isn't the best project to start with. As you can see, I just messed up the case by leaning the gun against the actual case. But hey, no big whoop. It's 3D printed plastic, and it's a project, so it's meant to actually be fun. And don't get down on yourself if something like that happens, because it's going to happen to everyone at some point. And just try to stay away from the leads, try to stay away from the circuit board itself when you're doing all of that. And now, before I get everything fully mounted back to the board, I just wanted to make sure I'm doing a quick test again, because I'm about to close this back up. So the best thing to do is have it lined straight up, and it just pushes right in. Now, I couldn't use the actual screws that I had. Oh yeah, I forgot to say, make sure you put that little guy in there. I couldn't use the actual stock screws. I had to go find a couple of more screws to then mount the circuit board onto the 3D printed unit. I left the back plate off, and you just kind of have to be very careful about how you place these wires so that you don't put too much strain between the casing and the board. Just take your time, be diligent, and you'll get there. Fold the unit over, and eventually it will pop right into place. If you just carefully press it into place, the 1/4 inches in the back will line up. And then again, I check my wires, and you see he has these 4 screw holes on the 3D printed unit, and they line right up with the screw holes then for the PocketMaster case. So another final quick check just to make sure everything's good after getting it in the case. It's always a good idea to check your work before you move on to another step. So I'm going to now mount this little guy onto the 3D housed case, and of course I got a little cat hair in there or an eyebrow hair, something like that. And I'm not going to take it apart to get it out. I couldn't blow it out. It's not visible at all when I turn the thing on. And I think now, actually, at this point, the hair's not even visible at all on the PocketMaster. Just be careful. Watch out for hair. And then grab the screws that mounted the circuit board onto the housing of the PocketMaster case. Screw them back in. I think there was 5 of them. I can't remember now. But keep track of your stuff, and you'll have all of them right there. Just don't get any of these screws mixed up with the 2 that belong to the belt clip. Those 2 are different. Everything else that's inside the PocketMaster and holding the case together are the same. So get all those screwed back into place. And the only other thing that I had that was an issue was that the PocketMaster screws for the base plate didn't reach the actual casing of the real PocketMaster. So I did have to find some other screws, and they were just a little bit longer, and they just happened to be the right threading. I just had them kicking around, so I can't leave a link for whatever they are, but basically same threading, just longer. Maybe Matt, if you're watching this video, leave a comment as to the thread size that somebody needs to pick up. And again, props to Matt. Very cool that you could print this out and figure this out, because these switches make this thing amazingly usable.